We get a lot of news breaking at this hour. We have just learned that there is a Treasury Secretary finally being named, one Mr. Scott Bessent. We're getting more dribs and jabs on Elon Musk potentially buying MSNBC. And what do you know, Bitcoin, well, it's getting closer to 100K, right, Rob? Rob Horton joining me, co-founder at 76 Research.
Hey, Trish, great to see you. Yep, Bitcoin just $100 away or so earlier today from 100,000. Maybe someone's selling it to prevent it from crossing until they wanted to. I don't know.
It's amazing. I mean, I thought maybe by inauguration we'd be there. Anyway, we can talk about that. We can talk about gold too, because gold has actually bounced back in part because there's some international challenges going on. And we have a big piece on it in 76 Research today. But before all that, Elon. Okay, so this is really fascinating. Elon Musk making some noise today. Actually, maybe I should start on Treasury Secretary. We'll get to Elon, okay? How's that for a tease? Scott Bessent, a big-time hedge fund manager, really smart guy. Any just initial thoughts on the Treasury appointment?
Yeah, I think Wall Street's really going to like this one. There was some nervousness that it could be some of these other candidates who were less less from kind of a pure Wall Street background. But I think he's widely understood to be a very, smart, sophisticated thinker. At one point, I guess we were watching that sort of play out on Twitter where Elon was sort of suggesting that Lutnick would be better. And
yeah, I was surprised by that, actually. Yeah. I mean, Lutnick is great too, and obviously super familiar with financial markets, but I had heard Scott from the beginning as a name. Yep. I think you had heard this too. And I was sort of surprised. I mean, it went to Howard and then it suddenly was Mark Rowan or Kevin Marshall, who has more of that traditional background. And yet Donald Trump seems to have come full circle, perhaps back to his original intention. Yeah,
he had a number of pretty strong choices, I guess. And I guess he finally made his decision, but, no, we know folks who've invested with Scott and think very highly of him. I think he's very much it was unfair to characterize him as some kind of mainstream establishment choice the way I think maybe Elon kind of had framed it.
Oh yeah, no, I was surprised by that too. I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, Kevin maybe more so, but not necessarily Scott.
No, and he's been I think a very strong and compelling voice, sort of articulating what really Trump has stood for and what his economic policies would consist of. So I think markets will react pretty well, when they open on Monday, that there's a solid next Treasury Secretary. And I'd add, it's really nice, from my vantage point, that it's someone with a real Wall Street background, a money manager background in that seat, as opposed to an academic like Janet Yellen or a PhD who's, I've had some experience actually directly with some of those folks. You'd be surprised about the knowledge gap between, an academic PhD type, as prestigious as their degrees may be, and someone who's actually been in the trenches, trading treasury bonds, buying and selling stocks, managing money, in terms of the actual practical knowledge of how markets work. So
totally different. I mean, and by the way, I should point out that most of those candidates, you think about Mark Rowan from Apollo, you think about Howard, obviously at Cantor Fitzgerald, and then Scott Bessent, who runs his own fund and founded his own fund. I mean, they're very hands-on, right? Like all of them are very hands-on. And I think that's probably very valuable to somebody like Donald Trump, as opposed to your point, Janet Yellen, who, if I had to hear her say one more time it was transitory inflation, I thought I was going to blow a gasket.
Yeah. And, I think it's important. I mean, he's someone who understands how markets will react to policies. He understands how to kind of address markets and communicate policy to markets. So, it's very helpful. And while he's on board with the kind of the broader MAGA agenda and the growth agenda, he'll be able to recognize when, ideas are maybe too or sort of not as grounded in reality, which could come from quarters where people are kind of throwing spaghetti on the wall. here he'll have a very, strong grasp of what works. And
Yeah. And look, I think Donald Trump wants somebody who can effectively use tariffs to our advantage on the international stage. And that's going to be where Scott's going to come in. He also, Donald Trump is very fond of low interest rates. We may not need them right about now, because I have a feeling things are kind of off and running and there's a lot of optimism, and like we're unleashing those sort of animal capitalist spirits that are so unique to America, and they've finally gotten a chance to sort of breathe again. And that's going to go a long way in terms of helping the economy along. So we may not need the Fed to be as aggressive on the interest rate front. It'll be interesting to see how Scott manages that. It may not be easy, because he's going to say, I want lower rates. I want lower rates. Can't you do something? Can't you do something about Powell over there? But, Powell was his appointment too. And one of the things I said about Powell back in the day was I liked that he came from the real world, that he wasn't entirely academic. And he's had a hard job. I think he's made a lot of mistakes, but look, knock on wood, we're going to be out of it, and we're going to be off and running. And it's one of the reasons why we created this Invest in MAGA. I should put this up, I think, investinmaga.com guide, which is free, by the way, to anybody watching the show. We encourage you to go over and take a look at that. Invest in MAGA. Let me make like a little lower. They call them lower thirds. But Rob, as I put this up, what are sort of the overall themes about investing in this moment? We'll get to Elon Musk in just a second.
Well, we wrote this guide with the idea that we are now turning the corner or I guess turning the page in the other direction versus what the Harris-Walz campaign was saying, and entering what is really like a more constructive investment environment. We have Trump coming, not only Trump won, but the Republicans won both parts of Congress. And that means that, they'll be, it's not going to be gridlock. We'll see some real activity, and we'll see some new policies get enacted. So on the tax side, that's very favorable. On the regulation side, whether we're talking about executive orders or we're talking about legislation, I think we'll see a lot of movement in terms of making, kind of helping U.S. industries, kind of execute their plans, particularly in the energy sector, on the so
we don't have to worry about ESG and DEI.
Well, I think, look, it's not the Green New Deal here, right? It's quite the opposite. It's drill, baby, drill. I think there's not the obsession with carbon emissions, which just had a very stifling effect on everything. And, in terms of, we've heard it from all the companies, in terms of their ability to build things and get environmental permitting. Not to say that this is going to be an administration that's happy to pollute all over the place, but we're going to have reasonable regulations. We're going to have movement of our capacity to export liquefied natural gas, which is going to be a real boon for the energy sector. It's going to really help the whole world. We're going to have this focus on data centers and providing the electricity we need to provide to data centers for the AI build out. The tech industry is just clamoring for that. So from my point of view, this is, that we're really going to stop doing things that were hurting the economy and U.S. industries and start doing things that will help them. And it just sets up for a very favorable investment environment. For sure.
I put it, the URL. So if anybody wants to go and just learn and understand a little bit more about the areas that we feel are very compelling right now, go over to investinmaga.com. Of course, 76research.com is where all of the information is, but that's just a free guide to kind of give you a little bit of a primer. Okay, here to this breaking story, Elon Musk to buy MSNBC. So this all kind of came about on X, formerly known as Twitter, because today somebody tweeted out about how, MSNBC is just hemorrhaging viewers and viewership is so down. And it's kind of a miserable place right about now because, their gal did not win the election. And apparently the viewers just left as soon as that transpired. And you now have NBC or Comcast putting the cable assets of this company up for sale. They had talked about it for a while. We've talked about it for a while, you and I, but on October 31st, the company came forward with the earnings report saying, you know what, we are looking at this. And then 2 weeks, literally like 2 weeks to the day after the election, that afternoon, they announced that they would be spinning off the cable assets. Not all of them. They're keeping Bravo, actually, but they're taking the networks MSNBC, CNBC, Oxygen, owned by Oprah, as well as Sci-Fi, and Golf Channel, all which are said to have about $7 billion in revenue a year. And they're spinning those off in part because, well, you know what? Comcast as a company will do better as a valuation. You're trying to return shareholder value to shareholders. It will do better if it doesn't have this baggage, which is seen kind of as, an older industry at this point. This is not a growing business, not necessarily that Comcast is, but it's so different from what they do. Plus there's the political stink and all that. So just to back up, they're selling. They've got SpinCo out there. And Don Jr. today tweeted or retweeted this out, sort of saying, hey, I have an interesting idea, Elon Musk. And Elon wrote back, saying, how much does it cost? Which is exactly what he said back in the day when he was looking at Twitter. And he spent some $42 billion. Okay, so let's unpack it. What do you think? I mean, it would be kind of cool.
Yeah, in terms of, if Elon, never underestimate Elon Musk, right? In terms of the way he can transform things. And, I don't know if he's not necessarily making tons of money on X yet, because of the tension with the advertisers, but he's transformed that platform and it's become such an amazing, the whole world is on it, and that's how people get their news, and that's how we get our perspectives. It's really, and it was possibly played a very instrumental role in Trump getting elected. So, in terms of what Elon could potentially do, thinking outside the box, getting control of some of these channels and introducing some new differentiated content that maybe aligns more with either his politics or just his interests, his way of thinking. We'll see what he's, if he can parallel park a rocket, right? I mean, he could probably generate some cable TV content for us. Yeah.
That's a good line. I need to write that one down and remember it. I think you could generate some cable TV content. I think you could actually have a lot of fun with this. The question I have is the model broken? I mean, here we are streaming live. Thank you for everybody tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, like, share, all that good stuff. 76 Research is our channel on YouTube, and it's very, very small. We just started it pretty recently, and we're here as much as we can be. The bulk of our work, of course, is coming through the writing and the research and the stock picks that we have that Rob and I, have put together these 3 different model portfolios for you at 76 Research. But this channel is growing, and I'm excited by it. And obviously the Trish Regan show, super exciting for me. And we've seen phenomenal growth, which has made me just say, well, gee, why didn't I come over here sooner? Why did I have all those years in cable? It reminds me, Rob, of back in my network days, like I was in network TV. And, growing up, that was a big deal because we'd sit down as a family and we'd watch the, ABC World News Tonight, because we were in New Hampshire and there was only one affiliate, which was ABC. So we watched our local news on ABC. We watched World News Tonight. And then, I'd occasionally catch CBS. I'd occasionally catch NBC. And so when I thought, okay, I'm going to go be a reporter, where did I want to go and report? At the networks, which is exactly what I did, actually, for all of those. In official capacity, more as a commentator at ABC, but for CBS Evening News and for NBC Nightly News. And that seemed like it, right? And then I was like, this cable thing, what is this cable thing? Eventually I went to cable and I was like, wow, okay, that's where it's at. Like, forget this network stuff where I get 90 seconds, if I'm lucky, to do a taped piece and trying to explain, I don't know, like the GDP report or interest rates or whatever it would be in such a short amount of time was really annoying and exhausting and contrived. And then I got over to cable and I was like, wow, the freedom. And yet not entirely, right? Because you still have the hard commercial breaks and you have only so much time and you have a lot of management structure, like multi layers of management structure. So coming over to this side of things and streaming, whole new ballgame. This is to me just like mind blowing. And I think that this is the future. So when I look at the potential for Elon Musk, like going in and buying these old networks, why do it if you could just create all that stuff maybe on your own and not have the baggage of these legacy contracts? In many cases, right? They're getting paid by the cable companies, which means they can't stream, they can't do the podcast, they can't do all the fun stuff that we're doing right now. I guess he would just go in and break all that up.
Yeah, in terms of what he could do to really kind of grow that business, that's hard to see. Or maybe he figures out some strategy to kind of integrate it with the with the streaming business. So in terms of it being like a real financially motivated move on his part, maybe that's not what it is. But Trish, it's important to remember, like from Comcast perspective, as we're talking about the changes in the industry, Comcast fundamentally is actually just a broadband company, right? It's not really a cable company in the way we traditionally thought of it. It's a company that brings broadband access to people's homes and to businesses, and that's how they really make all their money. And they have content, but it's not growing, and it's becoming it's a small piece. So you talk about 7 billion of revenues, for these channels. It's just a small percentage. So they're gonna spin it off. They're really just gonna kind of focus on their core business, which is delivering broadband, delivering internet access to people in order to give them what they actually want, which is just internet access, which is to see the streaming content, to watch your show, to watch Netflix, and they'll kind of rid themselves of the headache of Joy Reid and Morning Joe and the rest of it, which is probably causing some friction or in various ways in terms of since it's not really a profit driver for them, why do they need to have all that baggage with the customer base and potentially political heat? So it makes sense that they're spinning it off. It doesn't
totally.
Do anything for them.
Do you think that the election was dependent on it? When I think back about the hysteria on MSNBC, I mean, it was absolute hysteria in the mainstream media in general. They did not want Donald Trump to win. And I'm like, guys, as we'd hear about him being the next Hitler, I'm like, wow. I mean, that's like a serious attack. Like, how do you come back from being, except for the fact that he was president for 4 years and, we're still standing. And I think people look back fondly on how prices were so much lower. And there seemed to be, despite the chaos on, say, Twitter, I used to joke that he single-handedly was keeping that company alive until Elon came around. But aside from that, everything was kind of functioning smoothly as it should. 2020 got in the way with COVID. But other than that, I mean, it was a pretty good experience, I think, for most people, economically speaking. And so there's this desire to go back to it. But the mainstream was so worked up, Rob. I mean, it was sort of over the top. And as I look at it in retrospect, I'm like, oh, was this why? Because they knew that their livelihoods would be damaged, potentially severely damaged, because, there would be these changes coming, including to their industry.
Yeah, it's an interesting point where they just doing everything they possibly could to create hysteria to prevent Trump from winning and prevent this sort of inevitable, their irrelevance, right? But I mean, it was just a horrible, those analogies. I mean, I get what's the saying, whoever, in middle school, whoever accuses the other person of being Hitler first loses the debate. I mean, it was just such a ridiculous charge, and it wasn't once or twice; it was all day long. And I think everyone now looking at it saying, okay, is this quality content? Is this what people are really going to sit down and want to watch day in, day out, this hysterical ranting and raving? Mm-hmm. So they kind of broke themselves. They kind of, rendered themselves irrelevant, through this kind of shock value.
They totally did. They totally did. But I even wonder, from the FCC perspective, you now have, for example, Brandon Carr coming in, and he's exposing already what the second most important thing at the FCC in terms of their mandate was DEI, which is why when you turn on commercials and you turn on the television, you get somebody with purple hair and somebody with yellow hair and somebody with green hair, basically. I'm making this up, but the point being that we have to always reflect the diversity, and it feels very contrived and very forced. And that was because the FCC was demanding it. So I just look at it and say, okay, so now there's a new sheriff in town. This new sheriff is going to have higher expectations in terms of the quality of the broadcasting when you're getting, say, an FCC. If you're getting a license from the federal government, can you really spout like total nonsense that is 100% negative on one party and 100% positive on the other? I mean, so much for fair and balance. They're not giving us that.
Yeah, it's not as if Trump wants to, control what the media says, right, and sort of restrict their ability.
He definitely doesn't. In fact, when I look back on those days when he was in office, I used to make this point to people, like, listen, like the fact that you have this much discord from the media, that wouldn't exist if we were in a fascist society. Like the fact that there is this much, anger and it's expressed on television nonstop, that actually should show you he's not clamping down on that. And I don't mean this to be misinterpreted. And I think you're helping to clarify it. I'm not saying for one second that somebody shouldn't be able to spout their opinion, but it's a little tiring when I pick up the New York Times and they're trying to tell me that there's no inflation and that wages are growing. And I'm like, no, guys, inflation is cumulative. So even if it came down 0.1% last month, which it actually didn't last month, but let's pretend it did. The point is it's still on the heels of everything that's been going on. And then when you're telling me that wages are growing, when I'm looking at real wages adjusted for inflation, I know they're not growing. It's a little exhausting, right? The narrative is not fair. It is one-sided. And so you just kind of, I guess, if you're the evening news, want to do a better job, at least pretend to do a better job at offering all perspectives.
Yeah. And look, this Spinco thing was announced this week, right? So it's just immediately after the election. So they obviously waited to see what happened. And, on the one hand, you can see, okay, like the anchors themselves might have an agenda, but the company is looking at, okay, we have this group of people, they're ranting and raving about the guy who's now going to be president as being, a fascist dictator. And is that really like a plausible business model, to have all of these network, personalities just kind of attacking
bashing
the president
him all the time.
States
well, it's not a plausible.
Way.
It's like it's not even working for ratings. That's what's amazing to me. Like it's not like anybody's watching them. So it's like lose right across the board.
Yeah. So,
can you imagine what would happen though if like Elon gets to first base on this thing? I mean, can you imagine Joy Reid? Joe and Mika. It's fun to think about.
I'm not sure they'll have their seats for too long. Or maybe he would give it to them, right? Like maybe just for our continued amusement, maybe they would like continue to have like a 30 minutes or something on.
Yeah. And by the way, I again want to stress that there should be room for all opinions. It's like when Tucker went over to interview Putin and everybody flipped out. Oh my gosh, we should not. And I'm like, wait a second, like, come on. Like he actually runs a country. Why wouldn't you want to hear from him? Even if it's all noise, even if it's all propaganda, let me as a viewer make that decision about whether I'm going to listen or whether I'm going to tune it out. But let me have the opportunity to hear it. Don't shut it down before it gets to me. And that's what was troubling. And I guess what's fair, and I think that Elon would make a point to do this. Look, I mean, he's tried to recruit liberals to have more of a presence on Twitter. And I think that will grow in time. But you do want all sides represented. And that's really critical in our sort of exchange of ideas and speech. We need to make sure that we challenge ourselves. Otherwise, you can get stagnant really, really fast.
Well, and look, on Twitter, on X, I mean, liberals really do have a voice. I mean, RFK Jr. is not a traditional conservative, right? He is a traditional liberal. He has some some ideas that are not consistent with previous, Republican platforms. And I think there's a lot of, gravitation to some of the better ideas, right? And the focus on issues that have evaded, focus for, within conservative circles for years and decades. So there is this kind of like growth, and like as like the political realignment happens, and like kind of these different kind of divergent perspectives get integrated, and actually and many of them get traction because they are good ideas. I think RFK Jr. Has some really compelling ideas when it comes to improving the overall health of the American population.
You're saying something that's really interesting, though, these divergent ideas and the importance of having your ideas challenged because you can make them better and better and better. And what's been amazing about what's happened at this moment in time is that you have a Tulsi Gabbard and an RFK Jr. coming together with Donald Trump. And look, I mean, a lot of conservative economic thinkers, free market capitalists that are big believers in meritocracy. And, so all of these minds sort of coming together and taking the best of what we can all offer and forming something entirely new, because it's not the traditional conservative party. And, you look over at Kamala, she's certainly not the traditional Democrat party at all. So I think there has been this massive realignment. And I got to tell you, like, I'm sorry, but conservatives are just hands down winning the day. And they're winning the day on all of these policy issues that I think are so critical right now. And I'm excited about it. I want to ask you, because I should just point out, guys, we have 76 Research, 76research.com, and we put out a just tremendous, if I do say myself, piece today, very lengthy, extraordinary piece on sort of how we got to where we are with Russia and Ukraine and where we're going. And I guess, my sort of short synopsis of this, Rob, and I'll let you expand on it, but, thank goodness there's a change coming, because I don't think this would have ended well. And look, we're not at the end. Like this could be a deep, dark, long tunnel. I hope not, but it could be. But I have a feeling that if we had had 4 more years of bad decision making and indecision, we would have been in a very precarious spot as a world, right? Not just our country, but as a world. And I think the goal of everyone here is to have peace through strength. And you need an administration that's willing to, one, make hard choices, but also make the right choices for us. Talk to us a little bit about, because I'm always, that I'm a former student of history, but we're always a student of history, right? We're living history right now on the front lines. What's amazing is sort of the mistakes, in my estimation, that were made coming out of the Cold War. And George Kennan, who had been the former ambassador to the Soviet Union, he stated pretty clearly in terms of NATO, like, be cautious, don't go all in, don't have everybody joining, because at some point you're going to really threaten Russia, and they need to keep their identity and they need to be protected. And somehow this all, without being too critical, I guess I would just say somehow this went really south over the last however many decades. And we made decisions along the way that at the time may have seemed right, but in retrospect, they were extremely wrong.
Yeah. And so the entry point for our discussion in this new piece in the 76 report is this news this week about Biden authorizing the use of these long-range missiles to attack inside Russian territory. And then later in the week, Putin authorized his military to use their advanced missile systems to strike a target inside Ukraine.
Yeah.
And systems that could be loaded with nuclear warheads. So this is all about signaling, right, and posturing. And the Russians actually changed their nuclear doctrine, and Putin approved this to kind of suggest that an attack, a conventional attack that somehow threatens the sovereignty of Russia or Belarus, could be responded to with a nuclear reaction. Okay, so this is the markets are I look at it from the market lens because I think markets have a good read on how serious the situation is. Markets are we saw gold go up a little bit. Yeah. We saw I think there's a little pressure on stocks. It's definitely headlines across financial media. You don't want to have like nuclear brinkmanship between the U.S. and Russia, but this is like the logical conclusion of what this proxy war is all about, which is all about the U.S. kind of challenging Russia. So in our piece, we get into really like the backstory here, which I think we put appropriate focus on this foreign policy philosophy, the neoconservatives, and they have different labels, to describe it. Some call them neoliberals now, Atlanticists, but it's really this idea that goes back decades, and it came out, as you mentioned, from the experience of the end of the Cold War and the disintegration of the Soviet Union. We had this strategy, this idea when we were kind of like top of the heap at that point, right? Like the unchallenged superpower in the world, the United States. We had this idea that we could really extend our institutions and sort of kind of have our way in these kind of critical regions of the world and sort of kind of play. We saw it in the Middle East in terms of where we had the regime change wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which, in retrospect really didn't work out too well. Yeah. And the same playbook has been at work in Ukraine. And it's not something that happened 2 years ago. It's something that happened 10 years ago when Yanukovych was, you had that Maidan revolution, and Yanukovych was expelled from Ukraine. He was a legitimately elected president who had a close, supported an association with Russia rather than the EU. And our government was very meddlesome in all of that playing out. Mm-hmm. So, that all set the stage for what we have today, which is this very dangerous head-on confrontation with Russia, as Russia is looking to really, in my estimation, protect its core security interests, which is not how, the Biden administration or the neocons have really characterized this conflict. They characterize it as Russia being this, unhinged expansionist power getting ready to, take Ukraine and then keep rolling through Europe. That's the narrative that that the establishment has been trying to feed us. And I think that's the narrative that the incoming administration, and when you look at everyone who's filling up these seats, that's the narrative that they're not buying into.
No, they're not buying into it. And that makes the mainstream media very upset as well. But look, I think the bottom line is we need to be really sort of cautious and thoughtful about the choices that are made right now, because it's the law of unintended consequences. We think we're doing the right thing at the time, and then you look back 20 years from then and you say, gee, it wasn't that smart. So we just need, in my estimation, we need to have a longer game plan. You think about China, they're planning for the next 100 years and we're planning for the next 4. So, it is what it is. And we have elections, and we thankfully have the chance as the republic that we are to vote people out when they are not doing a good job. And this moment in time is evidence of that. So there's a lot riding on this administration coming in. I'm pleased with the Treasury Secretary pick, and there's going to be more good picks coming, in the next few days. One thing I would just also point out is that there's a contrast, say, between now and 2016. In 2016, it was sort of chaotic, and I was there on the front lines of that as well. And just as we got those cabinet appointments in, it felt extremely chaotic. I would say in some ways this has been a bit smoother. I mean, Marco Rubio getting announced right away as Secretary of State. Scott Bessent's name as Treasury Secretary was one that you and I both independently heard quite, through the grapevine, going back a ways. And so I think that was sort of always in play. Yes, we've had hiccups, but I think in the end, getting Pam Bondi, for example, is just a tremendous asset to the Trump administration. And I think we'll learn more in the coming days of other appointments that will be advantageous. But working out these challenges with Ukraine and Russia, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be important, and this is going to be top of mind. With this in mind, we were just talking about the run up, not the run up, but a little bit of upwards pressure, if you would, on gold, which was good to see, because I think, there had been this, I say this as somebody who holds gold. So I'll couch it with that, but I have gold just because, you never know. And in my estimation, given the money printing that we've been through, I don't necessarily think that's going to stop overnight. Listen, I'd love it if Vivek and Elon can figure this out, but the reality is we spend a lot of money, and there are global challenges like Ukraine, like Russia, like China, and like the Middle East that are not going to get solved overnight. So it's one of the reasons I like gold. But we saw it actually start to sell off a little bit. Now it's come back a little bit. I don't necessarily want it to go up, right? If you get my drift, I mean, I like it as an investor, but I would just say that when gold is going up, it's usually indicating some concern or fear about something else. It's what I keep for that really rainy day scenario. But yes, gold prices have moved a bit. The other thing that perhaps is not entirely, it's like you got to think about Bitcoin and gold differently, but related but not related, right? It's optimism in the future and in the sort of tech boom that's coming. I think that's partly what's fueling the crypto rise. You look at the price of Bitcoin right now, and it just blows me away. I mean, we're going to be at Bitcoin 100K in no time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we came within a few $100 earlier, so we're basically there. And so it's been a as we anticipated, it'd be a very positive. Trump's victory would be a positive development for Bitcoin. I think a lot of people who are kind of widely followed commenters on Bitcoin were kind of hedging their bets and didn't want to overemphasize how good victory would be for Bitcoin, because what if he didn't win? That would kind of imply downside, But it's really quite positive in that, Trump has just been very explicit in terms of his understanding or his perception that Bitcoin is a positive for the U.S. economy, for the U.S. financial system, should be embraced. We should look to utilize Bitcoin within our economy and see it as a growth industry. So it's Bitcoin, but it's also, other tokens, right? Other forms of
Ethereum, for example, has been going up as well. Let me play you. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I mean, like the appointments. Howard Lutnick as Commerce Secretary. He's been he's personally he's mentioned on. I saw something on the internet where he owns hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. So he's a big believer in crypto assets. His firm is just actually hosted a big crypto AI conference down in Florida, Cantor Fitzgerald. So he's been on the leading edge, and he'll have a pivotal role in terms of our policies towards like a digital assets framework and really kind of, moving the ball forward in terms of legitimizing and institutionalizing these digital assets.
Let me play for you just a quick clip of Michael Saylor here. He and I spoke recently. Michael Saylor is the CEO of course, let me see if I can pull it up. Hang on one second. I don't want to overpromise. You can also check out the entire interview on 76 Research if you're interested in hearing a little bit more from Michael Saylor. But anyway, it's struggling here a little bit. So, my tech skills are sometimes rather lacking. Here we go. Jockeying for who's going to be the currency of the world, so to speak, and the dollar comes under pressure. Is Bitcoin the answer, do you think? Is that the currency of the world for the future? And does it undermine or threaten the hegemonic power of the United States?
Yeah, I don't think Bitcoin threatens the U.S. I think Bitcoin is strengthening the U.S. I think that if you look at all the currencies in the world, the strongest currency in the world is the dollar. And so everybody in the world has either got a weaker currency, which is collapsing, or they're on the dollar standard. Like the euro is pretty much pegged to the dollar, the Singapore, the DROM, most of the quote unquote good currencies, the Swiss franc, et cetera, they're pretty much pegged to the dollar. And then the bad currencies, the weak currencies, the peso, the Naira, Egyptian pounds, Lebanese pounds, Turkish lira, they're collapsing against the dollar. So it seems pretty clear that the dollar will continue to spread, but there is an inflation problem. The inflation rate in dollars is not the CPI. It's not 2 or 3%.
So that's interesting. Again, we're just listening to Michael Saylor. who I did a rather extensive interview with, and you can watch the entire thing on the channel on 76 Research. But what struck me is, there is this consensus that it's not going to replace the dollar. Like, some people worry, and I'm sure if you're watching this right now, you're like, wait a second, we don't want a digital currency. We like our dollars. We want to keep our dollars. Walk us through sort of the mechanics of that. Like, people do worry about that for sure. Both Donald Trump and of course, Michael Saylor, who's, I think, the world's largest Bitcoin owner. Right. So he's certainly, both his company and he himself, he's got a lot at stake there, but he's insisting that this is something that's really complementary to and will help propel the U.S. to continue its financial hegemonic status.
Yep. Yeah, and I think maybe Satoshi himself, if he even exists, is the largest Bitcoin holder or something, right? But no, Michael Saylor is really like the prominent voice, the preeminent voice, I guess, in Bitcoin world. If you're worried about the idea of the dollar becoming a digital dollar and the kind of in the way that the Chinese want to do that, I think you should actually look at what's happening with Bitcoin in terms of the Trump administration's favorable view of it. You should look at that positively, because Bitcoin is a decentralized digital asset. It's not controlled by any government. It's not something that could be weaponized against the people or become a surveillance tool, right? So, what's happening here is the Trump administration is supporting a decentralized cryptocurrency to become kind of the main store of value, the main digital asset within the cryptocurrency space, rather than looking to have a digital dollar. But I think Saylor's real point, and it's an important one for people to start. People really need, in general, to start understanding Bitcoin, because there's going to be a lot of changes to our financial system, and it's being rapidly incorporated into our financial system. And I think Saylor's point is that Bitcoin actually functions as like a conduit for global capital to access the U.S. economy and to access the U.S. financial system. So if you think about it in terms of it like works with the dollar, and maybe it's a way for the U.S. dollar to kind of maintain its status as the world's kind of reserve currency, because it's a way for people in every country, regardless of, so long as they have internet access, they can access Bitcoin. And if they can access Bitcoin, they can access the U.S. financial system.
Well, it's priced in dollars. I mean, I've never really understood it when, people that are really, and listen, I've been following this forever. I was a big champion of it back when it was $10. I wish I bought it when it was $10, but I was just fascinated by this. And it's just, in theory, it's really, really cool, but I would keep coming back to it, it's priced in dollars. So I don't know as you entirely, what you're doing is you're creating a store of value that is so much more efficient, right, than anything else we got going on right now. And the ability to transact with that store of value 24/7, 365 days a year is really phenomenal. You and I both heard, I was introducing Michael Saylor at a recent conference, and I know you were there, and we both heard him speak outside of the interview. But one of the things that struck me, and the reason I wanted to interview him, was in hearing him talk about it, I love this idea that, you could access capital markets at all times, whenever, Sunday at 2 a.m, you could get access to financial instruments. And that's not the way it is right now. Like when the market closes, the market's closed. And in my case, if I'm, investing in an ETF in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's all over the place over the weekend, I can't do anything about it. I can't do anything until the market opens on Monday at 9:30 a.m. And what you have the potential to do is completely sort of transform financial markets in a really compelling, fascinating, interesting way, which to me is sort of mind-blowing and is in tandem with the whole tech revolution that's going on in terms of AI, electrification, and all that's coming our way.
Yep. And that's what gets us back to this idea of a digital assets framework. So, our capital markets are really based on like legislation that's like 100 years old, and like the kind of like the 40 Act, and right, it's from an analog world, and I actually heard Saylor speaking recently where he made, and this is something we talked about like in the context of the Texas Stock Exchange, how we've had this like declining number of public companies in the United States because it's just so onerous and difficult and problematic to be a listed public company. And it's like everything else, and Saylor made this point, everything else in the world goes up and to the right. The growth in the number of TVs in a house, TVs or cars or population or money or wealth, the price of gold, everything goes up except the number of public companies in the United States is like declining. Why is that, right? That's a broken system. So this digital assets framework is really all about, using technology to create more opportunity for companies to access capital so that, it's not, and it may not just be Bitcoin eventually that you can buy on a Sunday morning or sell on a Sunday morning, but maybe, tokenized shares of stock that, so we're not beholden to this kind of ancient technology in terms of like stock exchanges with specified opening and closing, right? Where we've kind of digitalized the entire capital markets.
It's really, I know, and if I look at some of the comments, I know you guys are reluctant, but you know what? I'm just going to say, trust me. Be careful. Be careful with what you're investing. I should point out, we did not put this in any of our model portfolios, but we have said to people that this is a very compelling, unique investment. I joke around and say it's sort of like schmuck insurance. Like you need to make sure, put a little bit in, because if Michael Saylor's right and it goes to 13 million by 2040, what is it, 2045? Do I have that right?
45 or so, yeah.
Yeah, which is sort of like max, they're not going to be able to mine any more Bitcoin at that point. Then you want to have this. But again, it's the framework of the system that we all are relying on. And listen, I sure as heck want to make sure that the USA is way out in front when it comes to our financial markets. This is why, for example, getting Scott in at Treasury was important. Having Howard at Commerce is really important. And having a president who's receptive, I think, to the newest technologies on this crypto framework is really important. And he is. And I don't think the other side would have ever gotten that. If anything, Elizabeth Warren's just always freaking out. Kamala Harris wanted to create new guidelines. Specifically, actually, it was strange for African-American men as it relates to crypto. And also weed, right? That was kind of one. Her proposal was a little scattered, but I think the bottom line here is like, this is something that's important to watch. I know it's scary. I'm not saying put, everything you got, anything, certainly don't, but I think be aware of it and know that it's going to go up and down and all over the place. But this probably is an important part of our future in some way.
Yeah, look, it's
Peace of My Mind. We love Peace of My Mind. He's one of our very first subscribers here on 76 Research. He's making the point, I still don't understand, or she, that why can't they mine more Bitcoin? And I guess what you need to know about this, and again, I'm not a computer person, but there's like only so much out there. Satoshi Nakamoto only planted, so to speak, so much Bitcoin out there. So the algorithms get increasingly difficult to be able to solve for them, to be able to mine it, because it becomes increasingly more precious as time goes on. It's really cool. Like it's a great white paper if you want to read something this weekend besides investinmaga.com. And it's kind of just mind blowing, but that's the theory anyway. Peace of My Mind. That's why it becomes more precious as time goes on.
Yeah. And mining is really like a bit of a metaphor. It's not actually being mined. What's happening is, all of these computer systems around the world are sort of, they're getting rewarded with Bitcoin in order to like verify the network and to support the security and stability and activity of the network. So it's like a computer protocol, and there's like an artificial limit at 21 million Bitcoin. And then at that point, this verification gets rewarded through transaction fees, which is a topic of that. That's sort of a subtopic of Bitcoin that if you really want to start getting into the weeds. But no, it's an extraordinary technological invention.
I want to say to Cat Crazy, who's watching us, one of our regulars here, who points out back in the day, if you bought Bitcoin, they'd recommend you print a copy as proof of purchase. And I'll just tell you a funny story, because one of my friends actually, who worked at Bloomberg at the time, actually was quite close to Elon Musk. He did a lot of reporting on Elon and was really into Bitcoin like I was. But he had the smarts to go out and purchase the Bitcoin. And he did it as kind of a joke for me and one of my co-hosts at Bloomberg. And one day he presented it to me and I was like, oh, that's great. And then no sooner did he present it than my co-host took the code, right? The Q code or whatever it is, you know, forgive me. I'm really showing my lack of tech, but you know, the code thing that they have, and showed it to the camera. And within seconds, our Bitcoin was gone. It would have been worth a lot, right? Compared to where it was back then. This was like, it was $10. And so that sort of demonstrated the fragility in some ways of it, like the code is everything. And, you know, I think I always remember that, but you have to kind of keep that private. But Cat Crazy talking about the proof of purchase, and the code was part of that.
Yeah. You know, I saw a meme today with the pizza day guy, the guy who sold like, what was it? Like 1,000 Bitcoin or something for 2 pizzas, and were used. It's like, would have been worth 900 billion now. So don't feel so bad. You could be that guy who's,
That's so funny. TCC says to me, answer that phone. It's Trump. I didn't get Treasury Secretary, but maybe I could get the Fed. What do you think?
Don't hold out for that. Yeah.
I'm teasing. Anyway, I love seeing all you guys here. And Rob, you know, it's a good time. It's an exciting time. I am full of optimism in a way that I just haven't been in a long time. So I'm always generally optimistic and glass half full, and I can always see the sunny positive side in anything. But right now, there's a lot of reasons to be excited. And it's all for this economy, our growth, and the potential. I encourage everybody to go over to investinmaga.com. I had it up. It disappeared on me, but investinmaga.com or 76research.com to get more information. It's all free at investinmaga.com. Totally free. And, you know, a little bit of worthwhile reading for you as you think about how to approach these markets. And I get it, Bitcoin's not for everyone, but there's a lot of opportunity in other spaces that are really going to see, I suspect, and Rob suspects, a lot of growth in the coming 4 years. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Thank you for being here. Go over to 76 Research, investinmaga.com, and we will see you there. Have a good one, Rob.
Okay, you too.